I was at my kitchen counter, staring at the sunlight streaming across the marble, when my phone buzzed insistently. The kind of buzzing that sets your chest hammering before you even look. I brushed my hand against my silk blouse, trying to steady the trembling, but the vibration felt like it was echoing through my bones. Mom, the word caught in my throat before I could stop it. My hands fumbled for the phone, and when I saw the number flashing on the screen, I froze. It wasn't her. Never had it been her before, but the dread that rose inside me made every nerve tingle. Olivia, the voice cracked over the line. And in that instant, my world collapsed. Ethan, my little boy, my laughter, my joy, wasn't okay. My heart raced so fast, I thought I'd pass out. My fingers shook as I whispered, "Mom, my son." The words were barely audible, but they carried all the fear, all the disbelief, all the unbearable grief that had just struck me. The kitchen felt unreal, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic outside, the smell of coffee I'd forgotten to drink, all swallowed by the weight of this moment. I sank onto the floor, my phone clutched to my chest, as memories of him, tiny socks, his crooked smile, the way he called me mommy, flashed violently unbidden. I remember the first time I truly felt powerless, even before Ethan was born. I was 23, working at a tiny marketing firm in Chicago, barely scraping by, and my parents had just dismissed my dreams as cute but unrealistic. I'd wanted to start my own design consultancy, to build something from scratch, but their words were heavy hammers against my confidence. "You're too young, Olivia," my father had said, folding his arms. "You don't know what real life demands. You'll fail." My mother, usually my quiet supporter, had only given a small, apologetic sigh and looked away. I felt a lump in my throat, my fingers trembling as I gripped the edge of the table, nails digging into the wood. That sting of being dismissed, of being seen as incapable, burned into me. That night, after a tearful walk through the empty streets of my neighborhood, I went to my grandmother's house. Grandma Lillian had always had a way of seeing right through me. She handed me an old, worn journal, its leather cover soft and comforting under my fingers. "Olivia," she said softly, "life will try to knock you down, but you hold your story. You write it. Don't let anyone else hold the pen." Her words lodged themselves in my chest like an anchor. I stayed up that night writing ideas, sketching layouts, planning the first steps of a life I had to create on my own. It was terrifying, the uncertainty, the lack of support, but also exhilarating. For the first time, I felt the stirrings of my own strength. It wasn't just ambition driving me. It was survival. I had to be ready, not only for myself, but for the little family I hoped to build someday. That night, I promised myself I would find a way to stand on my own, to carve out a space where I could thrive, free from judgment or expectation. And, silently, I made a vow that if I ever had a child, they would see a mother who would fight for them, no matter what. That promise, that journal, that moment of fierce independence, it stayed with me. Little did I know, life would test it far beyond anything I could imagine, in ways that would shatter me and then demand I rise again. The weeks after Ethan's accident were a blur. Mornings felt hollow, as if the sun had risen without purpose. I would wake, staring at the empty side of his bed, the small blanket still crumpled from the night before, and the silence would press in like a living thing. Friends called, texts poured in, but I could barely answer. I wasn't sure I could survive the sound of their pity, and yet I had to. Somewhere inside me, the spark my grandmother had lit years before refused to die. I returned to work, not because I wanted to, but because I needed a tether to the world. The office smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink, and I noticed details I hadn't before. The way the sunlight caught the glass panels, the faint hum of the air conditioner, the weight of my own heartbeat. I started small, sketching logos, creating designs for freelance clients, slowly rebuilding a rhythm. Some nights I worked until my eyes stung, and the apartment was silent except for the ticking of the clock. My hands shook not just from exhaustion but from grief, yet I held onto the journal my grandmother had given me, flipping through the pages, reminding myself of my own words. "You hold your story. You write it. It was during one of those late nights that I met Daniel Carter, a seasoned designer known in Chicago for his innovative campaigns. I had sent him a tentative portfolio, unsure if he'd even glance at it. But he did, and he saw something I had almost forgotten I possessed: potential. "You've got fire, Olivia," he said over coffee, his voice steady, encouraging. "Let's see what you can do." That simple acknowledgement became a lifeline. Slowly, I began landing larger clients. The first small paycheck that actually allowed me to pay rent without worry made me feel powerful again. Then came my first big project, a local nonprofit that had been struggling with its image. Late nights, endless revisions, doubt gnawed at me constantly. But I persisted. Each success, no matter how minor, was a testament to resilience, a quiet defiance against a world that had taken so much from me. I rarely shared this with anyone, not my parents, not the friends who tiptoed around my grief. I posted little on social media, enough to appear normal, but no one knew of the long nights, the tears, the fights with self-doubt. I carried my grief in one hand, my ambition in the other, learning to balance the two. By the time the first anniversary of Ethan's death rolled around, I had created a life that was mine, a small, thriving design studio, a network of clients who respected me, and a newfound faith in my own strength. And yet, the shadow of that day never fully lifted. It followed me like a ghost, reminding me why I had fought so hard, not for recognition, not for money, but to honor a son I could never hold again. My strength had grown, but my heart remained tender, aching for the little boy who had once called me Mommy-O. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when my parents showed up unannounced at my studio. I had been buried in sketches, the hum of my computer filling the room, the faint scent of coffee lingering in the air. The knock at the door startled me. My heart skipped, and a part of me braced for old judgments, for the familiar criticism I had spent years running from. When I opened the door, they froze. My mother's mouth opened slightly, as if she were searching for words she couldn't find. My father's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in confusion, as if he had expected to find a struggling, grief-stricken woman. Not this. I was wearing a simple gray blouse and tailored pants, but the confidence I carried radiated louder than any outfit. Behind me, my office walls displayed vibrant designs, awards carefully arranged on shelves, and a large canvas painted with abstract shapes, a tribute to Ethan, colors swirling in the chaos he had left behind. "Olivia," my mother finally whispered. I gestured for them to come in. "Welcome to my world," I said, voice calm but firm. "Make yourselves comfortable." They stepped inside hesitantly, taking in the details, the sleek modern furniture, the sunlight glinting off the glass trophies, the certificates of achievement framed on the walls. Their eyes fell on the corner of the studio where Ethan's favorite drawing still lay pinned on a corkboard, alongside a small, engraved plaque I had made in his memory. I had never told them about it. I didn't know, my father stammered. "You didn't know because I didn't tell you," I said softly, yet with authority. "After Ethan died, I had to rebuild. Not for anyone else, but for him and for myself. I promised him I would fight, and that's exactly what I did." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Olivia, you thought I'd crumble? You thought I wouldn't survive?" Maybe I would have, if it weren't for the journal my grandmother gave me, for the little fire she lit in me when I was your age. That fire never went out, and it kept me moving, even when everything felt impossible. I walked them slowly around the studio, letting them see the evidence of my journey, the projects that had earned recognition, the letters of appreciation from clients, the awards I had quietly received without their knowledge. Their disbelief was palpable, their shame almost tangible. And then, finally, the understanding began to creep in, the realization that the girl they had doubted, the mother they thought would collapse, had not only survived but had created a life that was remarkable in every sense. I'm the owner of the studio. I lead projects that reach hundreds, sometimes thousands of people. I did not wait for approval or support. I did this alone, I said. And every step I took was for Ethan, for his memory, for the promise I made to him. Tears streamed down my mother's cheeks, my father's jaw tight, his voice barely a whisper. "Olivia, you don't get to finish that sentence yet," I said gently, giving them the weight of pause. "First, you need to understand what it means to rebuild, to truly fight for something that matters. Then, and only then, can we speak about forgiveness, about reconciliation, about moving forward." For the first time since that terrible day, I felt a shift, not just in them, but in myself. I realized that my power was no longer defined by loss alone. It was defined by the resilience I had forged, the life I had rebuilt, and the boundaries I now held firm. The room was silent for a long moment after I finished speaking, the rain outside tapping a steady rhythm against the windows. I could feel the tension, their hesitant breathing, the unspoken questions. And then I took a deep breath and laid out the terms, not with anger, but with quiet authority. "You want to be part of my life again? Part of Ethan's memory? Then it's going to be on my terms," I said. My voice, though calm, carried the weight of years spent surviving, building, and grieving. No more dismissing what I choose, no more judgment. I will not tolerate old patterns that nearly broke me before. My father's eyes widened, but he didn't interrupt. He had finally realized that this wasn't about ego or pride. It was about boundaries, respect, and the hard-earned lessons of loss. "I want honesty," I continued, glancing at my mother. "I want you to recognize that life can be fragile. You can't take forgiveness for granted. You can't assume that showing up is enough. You need to actually engage, actually listen, actually grow." I laid out small but essential conditions. Acknowledgement of Ethan's impact and the respect owed to his memory. Recognition of my autonomy and accomplishments. No undercutting, no passive-aggressive comments about what I should be doing. Commitment to addressing past toxic patterns, anger, criticism, avoidance, neglect, and working on them actively, not just saying the words. Support, in the way someone truly present can give. Encouragement without judgment, presence without pressure. "This isn't punishment," I said softly, letting my words sink in. "It's an opportunity. If you can do these things, we can rebuild. If not, that's your choice. But know this, I will protect myself, and I will continue to honor Ethan every day, regardless of your decisions." They sat, absorbing each word. The shame, the disbelief, the pain, they all mingled in the quiet. And yet, I could sense a shift, a small but real willingness to step into a different way of being. I thought of the journal my grandmother had given me, its pages worn and softened with use. The fire she had ignited in me years ago had carried me through the worst imaginable loss, had taught me to hold my story in my hands and write it as I chose. Now, I was handing them a chance to write a new chapter alongside me, but only if they could meet me where I stood. I realized, too, that this wasn't just about them. It was about me claiming the space I had earned. It was about transforming grief into agency, sorrow into strength, and loss into a legacy. I had survived. I had built. And I would not allow anyone to diminish that again. Finally, my mother whispered, "We will try. We'll do better." "I believe that you can," I said, a small, steady smile breaking through. "But remember, it's actions, not words, that will show me that this is real." For the first time in months, I felt a quiet relief. The storm outside mirrored the turbulence inside, but there was a glimmer of hope now. The power had shifted, and I was finally standing fully in it. Weeks passed, and I watched the changes unfold quietly, like sunlight creeping into a room after a long winter. My parents made small, deliberate efforts, not perfect, but real. My father took time to speak with me without judgment, asking questions about my projects, my life, my grief. My mother learned to listen before offering advice, allowing me to share Ethan's memories without interruption or pity. Their willingness to evolve reminded me that even those who falter can find their way forward. I still felt the ache, sharp and unrelenting, of losing Ethan. Some days it consumed me entirely. Other days, it was a quiet pulse beneath the surface. But I no longer let it define every moment. I carried it like a talisman, a reminder of why I had fought, why I had risen, why I had created a life that honored him. The journal from my grandmother sat on my desk, open to a page I had written on the night I made my first big client pitch after Ethan's death. Strength is not absence of grief, it's surviving it and making it matter. I spent time tending to my own heart, reconnecting with friends who had remained steadfast, and mentoring younger women who reminded me of the girl I had once been, uncertain, frightened, but full of potential. I shared my story with them in fragments, careful to leave the rawest edges unspoken, but enough to let them see the truth. Resilience can coexist with sorrow, and strength is built in the spaces grief leaves behind. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the city, I held a small photo of Ethan in my hands. His crooked smile seemed to radiate light even from the page. I whispered his name softly, feeling both the sting of absence and the warmth of memory. And then I smiled, a quiet, fierce smile that carried all I had endured. For the first time in a long while, I felt whole. I had survived the unthinkable. I had built a life that honored my son. I had reclaimed my power and my story. Closing the journal, I leaned back in my chair, letting the golden light wash over me. "This is who I am now," I whispered, voice steady, unflinching. "Grief shaped me, love carried me, and nothing, no loss, no doubt, no obstacle, can take this from me." In that moment, I knew I was not defined by tragedy. I was defined by the life I had fought to create, the love I had held on to, and the legacy I carried in my son's memory. I had learned the hardest lesson there is: even when the world takes everything, we still hold the power to rise.